a lot of our residents is doing. But I mean, we're kind of in a drive-through from Gilead to Burkett. It's a cut through. Winfield Forest, New Torrance Parkway.
You can give us appropriate or inappropriate answers if you like.
Right at the entrance of our subdivision, we have one of the, traffic that, we have a narrow, it narrows down. Then opens up again. Hello, Emily.
Okay, it is 3:30, and we would like to call to order the meeting of the Ordinance Advisory Board. Attendance, we are missing Joe and Jake. I bet Jake is caught up in our traffic. But for now, Joe and Jake. All right, so for the approval of the minutes, do we have a motion?
I have a motion to approve with some amendments. I would like to make a motion that we approve and add the comments that I made related to the board not getting all material information on agenda item 4A. That was the reason I voted against the recommendation there, and I'd like that to be noted in the meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. How does that go about getting added? Did you write it somewhere, or?
If the comments that I made during that meeting could just be added to the meeting minutes related to not receiving that information.
Okay. All right, so we have a second. All in favor? Okay. 8-0, and Jake has gotten here. Hi, Jake. All right. Do we have any public comments? Okay. So here we are for the action agenda. 4A, we are back to considering a recommendation on petition TA 2301 and about landscaping with Lauren. Hello, Lauren.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Sorry, I forgot to speak into the mic again. Hello. Okay, so I'm just going to do a hopefully short recap about this text amendment. I know we've spoken about this multiple times. So text amendment 23-01 is a proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance to revise street tree planting requirements, and there are a couple additions as well. This is in response to a request from the Town Board of Commissioners to resolve challenges caused by street trees on the public right-of-way, so the maintenance of the right-of-way. There are 3 sections to this proposed text amendment. The first section is with regard to the planting strips and the type of tree that goes into the planting strip. So it indicates that, well, let me back up a little bit. So currently, the requirement is that the planting strip is 7 feet and that there's a large maturing tree to be planted in that planting strip at 40 feet on center. And if you choose a small maturing canopy-like tree, that you can plant that at 30 feet on center. This proposal indicates that if you choose a large maturing street tree, that it would be planted in a 9-foot minimum planting strip. And if you chose a small maturing tree, it would be planted in a minimum 7-foot planting strip. And then there's the option that in lieu of the 7 or 9-foot planting strip, you could have the developer could choose the option to have a 5-foot green zone with an additional yard tree in the private yard, and that's illustrated here. So option 1 are the 2 different types of planting strips, and then option 2 is the option to have the 5-foot green zone with the additional yard in the home lot. And Section 2 of this text amendment would impact the type of tree that is planted in the front yard. So currently, yard trees are required for new developments. And most of the developments we're seeing have a 25-foot built-to maximum or built-to for their built-to range, or there's a 20 to 25-foot built-to line. And in that case, that is generally not enough depth for a large maturing tree. And so the proposal is that there's an option for that to be a small maturing tree. And then the third section is an amendment to Article 5, so it's consistent with the proposed revision to the planting strip widths based on the type of tree that is selected. So there was a bit of follow-up. I'm going to kind of go over this piece by piece. So the memo that was included in the agenda was in response to 2 questions. One was in response to the lot depth and width. So, go back here. So in option 2 here, what we provided in the ordinance is that if someone wants to plant the additional tree in the yard instead of planting the tree in the planting strip, that the yard needs to be a minimum of 40 feet in depth and 50 feet in width. And I'm not finding where we wrote that, but that's what the dimensions were. And so the question was, how often do we get subdivisions with a front yard that has those parameters? And the answer is not often at all. So when we went and did some research, we found that there were 6 subdivisions that have a setback of 40 feet or greater. So that's where it's mandated that it must be at 40 feet or greater where you're building the home. And those subdivisions, the most recently built one was the Pavilion subdivision that's near the corner of Hiawassee and Huntersville Concord Road. But there have been no major subdivisions approved with a setback, like a mandated setback greater than 25 feet in the past 20 years. And the subdivisions we found that did have those larger setbacks and were also on average about 100 feet wide on average. So that would be by the choice of the developer. That wouldn't have, and depending on how far back it was, it may have been under county zoning. The second item or topic in the memo was with regard to the calipret planting. We did find that surrounding communities have a similar planting minimum for their calipret planting. To the town, it's very small deviation that we found there. And then we had a question with regard to the spacing of trees. So currently in Article 5, which is the article of the zoning ordinance with regulations about streets, and so this would not be the transportation or the engineering standards for streets, but the zoning ordinance requirements for streets. It has a stipulation that there is there can be field adjustments for driveways and utilities. And there's a recommendation that we include that to help, because there is some concern expressed about the trees being planted in close proximity to utilities. So we looked at that, and staff does believe that that's something that we can add as a part of this amendment, that in the consideration of street and yard trees, that field adjustments can be made so that they are not planting them in close proximity to utilities. And obviously, there are certain requirements in the engineering ordinances that mandate that you can't be that the trees can't be a certain distance from certain infrastructure. Let me see here. Then there's a concern about the small maturing trees in the 20-foot build-to range, or even the 25-foot build-to range. So we understand that concern, and quite honestly, staff find that, so the majority of the subdivisions being approved where you have 25 or maybe 30 feet maximum for your build-to range, it may be worth this board's consideration that more subdivisions are allowed to have that option to have a small maturing tree in the front yard rather than a large maturing tree. There's also a question about the definition of yard trees. So there's a consistency issue with the reference to yard trees versus canopy trees. So that's something that staff can also amend as a part of this ordinance. And then I think there might be a question later with regard to the installation guarantee. Okay. Okay. Yep. So currently, in Article 7, the installation guarantee requires that a final certificate of occupancy may be issued prior to the installation of trees and shrubs, but it excludes yard trees. So if, as this text amendment were approved as it is currently written, the street tree would be a yard tree, and it would, if you chose that option, and it would be excluded from the installation guarantee. And so there is a question as to whether or not they may need to be included in the installation guarantee requirement if they are being used to replace a displaced street tree. So that is all that I have in terms of updates.
Do we have any questions from the board at this time for the staff? Frank? Thank you, Lauren, I'm sorry.
A comment, not really a question, on the last installation guarantee. What I had written was, because Article 7.8.1 said excluding yard trees, my question was more why, not that we need to include it. There could be a logical reason for that I didn't know, and I just wanted to know why it wasn't included.
Sure, yep. So it's fairly simple. So and I'll speak specifically for major subdivisions because that's the easiest way to understand it. So when you're building out the individual home lots, essentially, we don't want to prevent an individual home buyer from being able to get a CO on their individual lot if all the street trees in the neighborhood have not yet been planted. And there's some developments that do choose at the end of construction to plant the trees at one time versus as each home is being built. There are advantages and disadvantages to that, but essentially the subdivision is not allowed to close out, like, so you can't finish the last home and turn over streets without having planted all the streets, so that's why.
Any other questions? Matt?
So one of the primary reasons we're considering this is to reduce the long-term maintenance cost of sidewalk repair. Has there been any sort of analysis to determine how this creates that effect?
So I guess the research that the planning department has done is to learn how municipalities choose options that can mitigate damage. And one of the ways that we found that they mitigate damage, there's obviously the option where you don't have trees, which is not what planning department is recommending, but in the municipalities that do have street trees that are trying to mitigate this, they have larger planting strips. So that is the best way to mitigate it in that sense.
Thank you. I've got one more. I was looking at this, I think, in Concord, and there, the 20 feet of the house being set back starts at the back of the sidewalk, not at the front of the lot.
Yes.
That might be another way to consider instead of, we're 25 feet back, and if you've got your sidewalk, you're 9 feet of green and what, 5, 6 of sidewalk?
So, yep, so you have the 7-foot planting strip. I think the sidewalk's 5 feet.
Okay, so you're at
Sure,
12.
yep.
So you've got 8 feet of yard between the
Yep.
back of the sidewalk and,
So from, I'm not gonna find a laser, but, okay. So this would be, so like about here, this is where your build to would be pulled from. So your 20 to 25 feet starts here from the back of the sidewalk.
okay, so it's the same then.
Yeah.
Some of the notes I read appeared a little differently, so. So we don't really have any number analysis. What about existing street trees? If a tree dies, someone cuts it down, they can replace it with something that's not going to create that damage. Does this allow that to happen?
So, yep, so we are in the process right now of working with an arborist to further specify which trees to replace with for a number of reasons. So one is obviously so that people are not replacing trees with trees that are gonna cause the same damage as the ones that are dead, diseased, or dying. And then also so that we're not having issues with monoculture and things like that. So that analysis is taking place, and it's going to take, or it will take place by an expert.
And then last question, and Mr. Trott, you may be addressing this. Do we have a meeting of the minds between Public Works and Planning on this amendment? Because at the last meeting, there appeared to not be a meeting of the minds as to the best way to handle this. So, and that may be what you're getting ready to talk about, but that was my next question.
Actually, it wasn't, but, so I would say I don't know that there's a meeting of the minds. There's definitely the more room that you can provide between the curb and the sidewalk for the tree. The further the tree is from the sidewalk, the better we see. Kevin from Public Works would disagree. So the more room there is, the less potential maintenance we see. I do have one slide you're talking, and Lauren actually mentioned about utilities. Tracy, if you can bring up the one. Just thought it'd be a good idea to look at a subdivision plan. It's a PDF. Yes, yep. You can zoom in. So this is a plan that was submitted. Okay, it's not approved, but it's in the review process. This is the Brown Honeycut, I think is what it's called. So out there off Irvin Cook Road, off of Gilly Road, if you know where I'm talking about. So, and I don't know if Tracy can zoom in a little bit. Let's see if we hit the plus button. Yeah, you got it. Yep. Try one more and then scoot over. Yeah. So I tried to highlight on here. This is the just one sheet of the landscape plan. So, and I tried to color highlight so you can see some of the lines on there, because there's a lot of stuff on one plan. So you can see the trees or the circles. So those are different kinds of trees. What's in dark blue, that's stormwater. Those are stormwater lines. What's in green, that's sewer. What's in light blue, that's water. Those are three of the utilities on the plan. There's additional utilities not on the plan. That would be power, gas, telecommunications, how many ever companies those are. So you can see it makes it really tough. Also shown on here in the purple circles, those are street lights. So you can see you're trying to put in street lights so that you can see the light. And then also fire hydrants, the blue circle, if you go back up, yep, just leave right there, thank you. The blue circle with the light blue in the middle, that's a fire hydrant. So you want some clear around that too. To me, the point of showing this is there's a lot of stuff going on in the right-of-way with utilities, and then you're trying to put trees in there to avoid it. These are 52, I say that's showing 52-foot wide lots with a setback of, I don't know, maybe 20 feet, 20, 25 feet. And so the other part of it that you have to leave room for is the driveway for the house. So if you have a 52-foot wide lot, driveway is about 20 feet wide. So now, okay, that's going to be completely covered, so you're not going to have a tree there. That's not what's shown on the plan. Yeah, so some of them are 14, and then it widens out to 20. Again, there's a lot of stuff you're putting in a very small area in here. And so if utility lines need to be repaired and there's trees, well, then the trees would have to be taken out or the roots would have to be cut to get to those. Again, and those sewer connections and water connections, I'm just showing you to where the meter or clean out may be. You know, those connect all the way to the house too. They keep going on from there. So I just want to give you a quick visual of all of the stuff that goes into a new plan and how there's a lot of conflicts and things you have to look at as part of that. I just highlighted one sheet in the plan. We've got the whole plan set. If you want to look sheet by sheet, it's going to look very similar to this. And so I would concur when the lot depth is really short, you know, not a lot of distance between the house and the street, you can see they're trying to put a front yard tree, and street trees and everything, and it's just overlapped all on top of each other. It's just something new wanted to show.
Jake?
So isn't it a better option to just make one street tree per lot instead of 40 feet? On a 52-foot lot, you end up with 2 trees. So when you reduce it, if you said one street tree per house, per lot, no matter what size lot it is, and make the planting strip wider and make sure the house is far enough back so when you park in the driveway, the vehicle doesn't overlap the sidewalk. Wouldn't that solve all the issues of, because if you have a 40-foot separation between trees on a 52-foot lot, you end up with 2 street trees on every lot, which isn't necessary. So you go down to 1 street tree, you eliminate half the street trees, you still get the canopy and you still get the look you want.
So what happens in reality is you have 40 in every 40 feet. When you start looking at the stormwater inlets and those types of interferences, driveways, those types of things, you end up averaging about 1. You're not going to have 2 per lot. It'll be 1 1/5 tree. And then you look at spacing. Sometimes they do driveways back to back, so you're not going to put street trees in there. So we work with the developers at the end. So the goal was every 40 feet. In reality, it ends up being a little bit greater than that. And then we had another point. I knew that was that one. And that's also part of why this text amendment, with the houses being at that 20 to 25-foot range, there's just not room. That's why we're requesting to allow a smaller tree in the front yard.
What do you consider a smaller street tree? What type of tree is that?
There's cherries, there's a laundry list of trees. That's why we're going out to the arborist to find out what are more local and native in nature, because some of the trees that we have are still, Bradford pear is still on the list. It's an invasive species that's coming off the list eventually. So we're going to work with an arborist to find out and recommend the ones that have minimum root sizes, deep tap roots, increase the survivability, also minimizes damage for on-property damage as well as in the right-of-way damage as the trees mature.
Okay.
Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what we'll do is we'll come up with a list of allowable trees, and like I said, we're going to rely on our arborists to lean on them to find out which ones have the highest survivability, and our local and we do have a list. We are further refining these.
Street trees, but these are
Correct.
some small trees.
Correct.
that are listed, so
So, yeah, we've got
unfortunately, we
hawthorns,
don't have a slide that shows this,
No.
but there's a,
the 12-page manual.
apologies,
Yeah.
but what you have is the list of all the trees, so getting to your question, so there's a list of small trees, large trees, shrubs, and so there's columns, and one of the columns happens to be about street trees. Is this an appropriate street tree? And so the ones that with the roots that grow down, now we'll say over the years, the problems that was $500,000 a year spending and plus is the trees weren't planting the right type of trees. And so that's been part of the problem. So sticking to trees that will grow down, deeper roots, but I just want to be sure you knew that we did have that list.
The list was provided, like the first time we talked about street trees, and that was before. So I'm sorry that we didn't see
Yeah,
the list.
And additionally, it's specifically to the sidewalks. We're exploring different construction techniques with the Parks and Rec, or the Public Works Department and Engineering Department. Instead of having dirt base, or dirt, you can look at putting gravel in, which discourages roots from growing underneath. There's a lot of different construction techniques that can be employed moving forward as well.
Harrison.
Okay, I read Amy's email about only being able to ask one question. So I'm gonna ask one question, but it's gonna have a bunch of commas in it.
Ask.
You can ask.
No,
One question with multiple parts.
exactly. Well, no, really, my concern, as you know, we met earlier, but I'm concerned about the part about putting the tree on the private property. So my question is, when the developer plants the tree, does that tree, and I'm kind of looking at Emily, but does that tree convey with the deed to the new owner? And when I sell the house, does the tree convey with the deed? In other words,
Yard tree?
yeah.
Yes, it does.
So if we put it in the house, okay.
If you have a yard tree in a private lot, does it convey with the sales?
I mean, it conveys. And it's on my property. I'm not allowed to cut it down. I'm not allowed, do I have to maintain it? Who's gonna tell me how to maintain it?
Hopefully your HOA.
Well, now, if the HOA, that's a different deal. I'm talking about from the city's point of view.
We'd like to have some budget for an arborist.
Well,
That'd be nice.
so would I as a homeowner. And my point is, well, I can't talk about this. I'll talk about this during the discussion.
The point of my question is,
But, yeah. But I just want to know if that tree, I know this says that the developer shall. There's nothing in here that says what happens to the tree afterwards.
So if that tree is required by the zoning ordinance and you were to remove the tree, we would have the ability to come and take action, since you would be violating the zoning ordinance.
Okay?
Frank.
All right, my question is related to this. When you take a street tree out of the green zone, it's no longer a street tree. You put it in the yard, it's a tree that's in the yard. There's no definition or description of that in the ordinance. It's not guaranteed. So there are some things that probably need to be, loops that need to be closed that aren't going to get closed with this text amendment is what I'm trying to say. Because once you, let me ask one, if a developer comes to you and they need to, they cut down, they need to cut down more specimen trees than they're allowed. They go over one. They have to replace 1 2-inch they have to replace it by inch, right? So, and they can plant those in people's yards, right?
As long as they are above and beyond what is required.
Right.
Correct.
So once they plant this, if it's not a street tree anymore, the ordinance currently doesn't say that that can't be included and counted in the tree canopy for the developer. A yard tree, nowhere in our ordinance does it prevent the developer from using that yard tree as meeting part of the canopy requirement.
Yeah, they could not use that to meet mitigation.
So
But what I'm getting at is when you go back and you look at what our ordinance says, what you can't do, it does not include yard trees.
So the yard trees are designated to be supplemental. They're planting beyond what you would do for your tree save or mitigation for tree save. So your tree save is only based on the existing trees on site before development begins. Once you develop the site, you are required separately of tree save to have yard trees for the site. Now, I do understand what you're saying with the terms, the yard tree and canopy tree term, that being more consistent, we can definitely resolve that. But they are treated separately in the ordinance.
When I think back on the back and forth of what we've been provided, and then Frank's and other people's comments, both written and oral, the key here, we're all together talking about trying to find ways to save future expenses by the city in the repair of sidewalks and curbs and things like that. And we've been talking about, there was a time when we talked about planting strips, you know, I think it's 5, 7s, and 9s. Just 7s and 9s?
5, 7, and
5, 7, and 9, that's what I thought. 5s can't have trees, that's part of the question. So, then my question is, if 9 seems to be better than 7 in terms of spacing off of sidewalks and curbs, is there a reason we are mandated to have 7s? 7-foot strips?
So the reason that we're using 7 as a part of the text amendment is because it's the current requirement. So the idea was to provide 2 options for future development.
Mm-hmm.
And the future development would have the option to pick the width of their planting strip based on the tree that they would like to plant. So the current width is 7 feet, and the idea is that right now, developers are planting for the most part, large maturing trees in the 7 feet, and we're finding that that is inappropriate. It's leading to some of the issues that we're seeing. So the idea is that in the future, with this text amendment, you would only be allowed to plant small maturing trees in the 7-foot width, and then you could only plant large maturing trees in the 9-foot width. But obviously, if there was a recommendation that any street tree be planted in a greater width, then that's consideration as well.
Jake?
On the 5-foot green zone, what situation would you allow that 5 foot with no tree? And how far would the setback be off for the existing building?
So I believe that, yeah, I believe that's part of some of the concern is what the appropriate front yard width would need to be to move the tree. So our current recommendation would be that the yard depth would need to be a minimum of 40 feet, and the depth would be a minimum of 40 feet, and width would be a minimum of 50 feet. And that's smaller than what we've seen even for the larger lot subdivisions that we have in town, because those appear to be able to accommodate large maturing trees than the subdivisions that have been most recently approved.
But isn't the town better staying out of monitoring private properties and go with either 7 or 9, eliminate the 5, not telling someone you have to plant a tree on your property and then you have to police it? Because when you go in to develop a street, the developer is required to put street trees in. So as a developer, if you put your street trees in, if you put them in after, you have to bond it before you can get any CO. So the developer's bound to put street trees in, and either keep it 9 or 7. If you want a streetscape with trees, eliminate 5 foot, don't allow it, because if you're saying a green space is 5 feet, then I'm gonna mandate that the homeowner has to put it on their lot.
Yep.
Then you have to go over there and police and tell the guy. I just think that government should stay out of monitoring single-family lots and keep it within the right-of-way and the setback. And if you have a sidewalk problem where they keep buckling, the solution is widen the planting strip so that you don't have that issue.
Yep, that's a fair comment. So the response that we would have is that kind of is related to our tree save. So, and here's how. Every zoning district has tree save minimums based on the existing canopy. And one of the kind of balances for removal of trees is that you're planting more trees when you build a development. And specifically thinking about a major residential subdivision where you have single-family homes, for the most part, we're seeing that developments are staying not significantly over the minimum that they're required to save. So if your zoning district requires you to save 35%, we're not typically seeing somebody save 75% if you're only required to save 35%. So in those situations, you're removing a significant amount. And even in those situations, you may be going beyond that, saying, you know, we can't save the minimum that the ordinance is telling us to require, and we're gonna have to do some type of mitigation, either by replanting or a payment to the tree fund. What I'm getting to is essentially that if the idea is that you're getting to is that we don't want to have yard trees as a mandate, then we want to think about how we're going to mitigate the loss for not replanting those trees in the front yards. Because the idea of planting those trees in the front yards is that they also contribute to the tree canopy in the town. So if we're not going to mandate front yard trees, are we going to increase the tree save requirement to mitigate that loss, or how will that be balanced?
Just eliminate the 5-foot planting strip. So if I go in to develop a subdivision, it's not an option. I either have a 7 or 9-foot planting strip, period. So then you don't have to worry about that. So if I have a 7 or 9 foot, you're getting a tree no matter what. If you give me a 5 foot, says I eliminate it, then I have to go and find out whose yard I can put these trees in. And that becomes, so just eliminate 5-foot planting strips as an option to developers and just get it out of the code and go with either 7, 9, 10, whatever width you want. And then you have your street tree.
Yep,
in there.
so you would have the street tree, but then you would for the most part, given the home sizes, the lot sizes that we're seeing, you have a minimum of planting like usually one front and one rear yard tree. So in a subdivision that has, let's say like 90 home lots, that's two trees on each lot. So then you're still losing 180 trees that would have been planted on those home lots. So would we increase the tree save to mitigate for the loss of those trees that would have been planted in the yard lots? I know.
Hold that thought. Yeah, Harrison.
Oh, I never turned it off. Okay. I'd like to get to the discussion point here, since we're started.
You're asking another question.
So, okay, so I'm going to let my partner Frank here make a motion, if that's okay with everybody.
Do we have?
I have a motion, and I'm open to amendments. Okay. The Ordinance Advisory Board recommends that TA 23-01 street trees recommends approval and that it moves forward for public hearing. Planning Board recommendation and Town Board decision with the following text changes and considerations. Text change 1, that Article 7.7.3C be changed to read, in cases where the front built to range or setback is 20 feet or less, be changed to 25 feet or less. Small maturing trees may be permitted. Text change 2, that in Article 7.7.3CA, that text be changed from new trees to yard trees. And recommendation number 3, that a definition of yard trees to the zoning ordinance, Article 12 definition, be added. Let me make sure I have no others there. And recommendation number, which one am I on? Is that 2? Number 4, that the reference note for lots greater than 50 feet in width with the front build to area depth of greater, and I'm not going to read all that, be deleted. And that the following items be considered. 1, that the wording of the proposed draft text of Article 7.7.2A be amended to be more in line with the wording of Article 5.5D2 to allow more flexibility in the spacing of street trees and removal of street tree planting plantings near intersections, and that consideration, that's it.
I second.
And that's open for not, and I agree with what Jake was saying. I mean, if I'm a homeowner, and some homeowners and HOAs are responsible for their street trees, just like you would be if the tree is in the yard. I would much rather be responsible for the tree on the street than sticking one in my yard with the other problems that may or may not bring. So I have issues with adding more trees, more yard trees within that. So that's where I stand with this right now.
We have a motion and a second. I'm not entirely sure that I know what the entire motion is. I mean, I know it's pieces of this paper, but I couldn't repeat it if I needed to. So can you, let me have it? Okay, Harrison.
Okay. We still haven't addressed the concerns of engineering and the utilities. So if we specify these new trees that are gonna have, I've got pictures of roots spreading 50 feet and getting up under sidewalks from yard trees. But if we go with the newer tree list that we got, now what we're doing is we're taking those trees that spread those roots and disrupt the sidewalks and the streets out. But now the roots are gonna go deeper. And deeper means it's going to be more interference with the utilities because we're planting the trees right on top of the utility easements. So, and I don't know how you, I mean, I don't know what the solution is. It's you know, you do away with trees, you know, but those utilities are going to continue to be a bit of a problem, particularly the sewer, because that's what the roots like to get to. So, is there a solution to that from the arborist? I mean, are there trees that don't go wide or deep?
So when I was doing the kind of like research about what other communities' requirements are, there are a couple that have arborists on staff, and in their plan review process, essentially, the arborist participates in the plan review with regard to landscaping. And a large part of their responsibility is essentially to make sure that there isn't interference with the species that's picked and with the location that's picked. And that was, based on their recommendation, the best way to mitigate the interference with utilities was at plan review. So the plan that Mr. Trott had up, where you would be looking at the locations of those utilities and where the trees were proposed to be, whether they're in a street tree, a yard tree, the arborists will be looking at that. They will be looking at where the utilities are planned and indicating where the trees need to be planted with respect to those. So that was the feedback that I got from the other municipalities.
I think we kind of need to move forward and vote. I don't think that, I mean, everything has an issue. So if you put trees in, it's either going to buckle the curbs, going to hit the utilities. You eliminate street trees, you eliminate the appeal of a street. So if the board's position is you want street trees to create an appeal, you're going to have maintenance issues. Not every tree you plant tears up utilities or pops a curb. And it's, you know, it's just basically a part of life. So you're not going to come up with an ordinance that says every one of the problems, we're not going to get the sewer, we're not going to get utilities, we're not, you know. So it's really, let's kind of make a decision on what we want to do. And if someone's utilities get hit by a root, you got to fix it. But I think the big thing for the town is to stop the sidewalks from, reducing that to stop sidewalks from buckling. Are you having issues where storm drains are storm systems being torn up by roots? And then are you getting people calling up where they're having their sewer, or the power companies calling up, and is that as much of an occurrence as the sidewalks?
We don't hear from, because Charlotte Water does the water and sewer in town, we don't really hear those complaints as much. But we do know that they exist, because a lot of times they have to come tear our sidewalk up to fix that utility. So that's how we hear about it kind of secondhand. So there are a fair amount of those conflicts that are happening. But, you know, I like to say that from the town's perspective, it's the trip hazards and the sidewalk maintenance that's causing the greatest liability and the greatest expense.
So I think that if you eliminate everything out of life that's going to create an issue, we're going to be in a rubber suit walking down the street. So the trees are going to create an issue, come up with an ordinance that reduces, even if you reduce it by 50%, you've achieved that, but you still want to keep a quality of life, an appeal to your community and your streets. So I think we move forward and take a vote.
Okay. I'm going to call on Commissioner Munger, but Frank, can you send me the motion?
You want me to just specifically go over the text changes that I recommended? Okay. Number one was in Article 7.7.3C. It reads, in cases where the front filter range or setback is 20 feet or less, small maturing trees may be permitted. I changed that. I recommend changing that to 25 feet. It's a 5 feet difference. Number two was Article 7.7.3A. The leader on that paragraph A states new trees. I don't know what new trees are. I know what yard trees are, and that's yard trees. So I recommended that new be changed to yard so that it reads A, yard trees. Three, add a definition. There's no definition in the zoning ordinance. Add a definition for yard trees to the zoning ordinance, Article 12 definition. And recommendation 4 was to delete, and I'm going to make an amendment here and give the article piece on that, okay, Tracy? Article 7.7.2, note 1, which begins to read, for lots greater than 50 feet in width with a front fill-to area depth of greater than 40 feet in lieu of providing a planting strip. And that goes on to talk about, that's the 5-foot option. Delete that note. And then I had one consideration for the planning department, and that was to consider rewording Article 7.7.2A, or adding that it was more in line with Article 5.5 D2, which is the street design specifications. That is a little more detailed in what you can do. It's not just driveways, it's utilities. That be rewritten and put into that paragraph A.
Could you put that, where it shows the 3 different options back up on the screen? No, yeah, good, keep going.
The last comment that you made, Frank, about the note,
No, it's
Yes, ma'am?
point to it for me, please.
I'm sorry?
Point to it for me. Where is it? Okay.
On your,
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Y'all are trying me. So it should be.
Yes. So,
Good to know.
so the option that he's talking about eliminating is his option 2 on this screen. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Commissioner Munger.
Thank you. I just want to ask if, based on the motion that was made, does staff agree that the outcome of that motion would significantly or at least moderately reduce the impact of expenses related to sidewalk repair and have a negligible impact on any other utilities? Arm wrestling.
I mean, I wish I had a a magic ball that I could, rub on and find out, I'd go play the lottery and I wouldn't have to worry about it. But I think that the proposal to anything we can get to widen, to lessen the root, lessen the root ball, lessen the root spread, and the wider the zone is better than what we currently have. Do I believe it's the best option? No. I mean, I think the best option is to put trees in yards. That if you want my honest opinion. But that's, I think that this has a potential to lessen the impact that we see moving forward.
When you say this, you're talking about the amendment.
Yeah, yes, I mean, I personally like option 2, that you're doing away with, because I love trees. I think trees have a great space. I don't think right up against the street is where they need to be. That's my opinion. I think from a maintenance standpoint, it's burdensome, but I think even eliminating that and widening the planting strip and allowing for small maturing trees will help. I think it'll reduce. To what extent, it's yet to be seen. We may be here in a couple of years talking about that it is still a growing problem, and we'll have to address it again, but I think that this is a good start.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would say that, even if option 2 were left in, the impact of that is, I mean, I just heard that how many subdivisions are going to be built that way to begin with. That's something in the future. So the impact right now is what we have on the 5 and 7 footers. It's not going to be what's in the option 2. And I agree with you that the small tree option appears to be, unless you go to the 9-foot, unless you go to a 9-foot green space. The use of small trees in the yard and small trees in that 7-foot is, I think, will have, I mean, I would ask, I just heard what you said, but I would think that would help reduce. It won't eliminate. I'm not sure that we can eliminate. But you're the expert, not I, and my ears are open.
In line with that, would it be better if we did away with the large tree option and just went with a small tree option in either 7 or 9 foot? I mean, why do we need large tree? Y'all got a slide that shows the canopy width. Can we throw that up there on the? Why don't we just go to small tree option for yard trees, for street trees? Do away with the large tree.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to aesthetics, and there is something that can be quite majestic with, the appropriate large trees. And I think through working with arborists, we can narrow down our list of street trees that will minimize impacts moving forward. So in conjunction with a 9-foot strip and that revised list, I think we can get a win-win for everybody here.
Okay, well, I wanted to see this because you can see that the tree length, this is showing the canopy.
Correct.
Average canopy. And you can see it's extending over the roofs of the houses as well as completely over the streets.
Correct.
And my understanding, and this may be an old wives' tale, excuse me, but is that the roots go as far as the canopy goes. So,
Generally.
yeah, so the roots are also going under the house and under the streets.
Right.
So
again,
if you go with a smaller diameter, maybe that's not.
by coming up with that more appropriate list of trees, we will, like I said, we'll minimize those impacts.
So then why not go with a 5-foot planting strip, 5-foot sidewalk, and a 5-foot right-of-way? You still end up with 15 feet, and make the street tree planted on the 15-foot mark. So now the street tree is on the border of the right-of-way and the property owner. You've pushed the street tree 15 feet off of the edge of curb. Because if you have a 9-foot planting strip and a 4-foot sidewalk, 5-foot sidewalk is 14 feet. So if you narrow the planting strip 5 feet, gets your tree out of the area where you want, 5-foot sidewalk, and you still have 5 foot of right-of-way, put the street tree on the right-of-way property line, so now the street tree is on, and the canopy is growing up over the sidewalk.
How you're pushing buildings back further from the street, and part of the
Nope.
ordinance, the form-based code is to keep the buildings closer towards the street.
Well, it's the same thing, because if you got a 9-foot planting strip and a 5-foot sidewalk, you got a 14-foot setback off the curb.
So are you saying to put a street tree now, it becomes a yard tree, and you're having a second yard tree
No,
front?
5-foot planting strip, which is your green strip, 5-foot sidewalk, it's 10 feet. Now you still have 4 more feet of that right-of-way. So now you got 4 feet of green, and that tree gets put right on the line. So now that tree becomes a yard tree and a street tree. It pushes you out of your utilities. It helps, so now you're not buckling the curb or the sidewalk because you've set it back off the sidewalk more. And then does that solve the entire problem? And you're still within the same right-of-way. Now that fixes everybody's problem, and you still get that streetscape and adopt that. The only issue is a lot of utilities may end up under the sidewalk. So if they ever have to repair a sidewalk, they're gonna break a block to fix it, but then they're gonna have to come back and fix it, so.
Did you have a response, or you?
There's a motion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, he's saying
Madam Chair, with looking at the time, there's a recommendation out with a second discussion. Everything that I've heard is interesting and good things, but it's a different text amendment than the one that we're discussing. And I like what I'm hearing, but to resolve this text amendment.
So I'm going to take a stab at the motion, and you can correct me if I don't quite get it.
Are you making a substitute motion?
No, I
She's going to restate your motion.
was going to restate.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No. Okay, so the motion to approve TA 2301, but to change in cases where the front build-to range or setback is already 20 feet, change that to 25 feet or less, is that correct? Or less. Small maturing trees may be permitted, and recommend a change. No, that's not right. Is it? Okay. Recommend the change that new trees be renamed yard trees, and recommend add the definition of yard trees. And we still want to delete the number 1, the 4 lots greater than 50 feet in width with a front build to area depth of greater than 40 feet in lieu of providing a planting strip located between the existing street and proposed sidewalk. The development may provide a minimum 5-foot green zone and 1 front yard tree in addition to required supplemental landscaping provisions for residential lots in the following section. That was to be removed. And it was seconded. Okay, so we need to vote. All in favor for that motion?
There was one other item that was, excuse me, Madam Chair.
Sorry.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, there was one other item that was a consideration for rewording of Article 7.7.2. That read, large maturing canopy trees shall be planted at a spacing not to exceed 40 feet. I'm just reading this, it's not part of the motion. Large maturing canopy trees shall be planted at a spacing not to exceed 40 feet on center, except that spacing may be, to reword that as, to consider rewording or improving that in the wording of Article 5.5D, 2, street design specifications that allows more flexibility and discusses utilities.
Okay.
Do we all really understand what we're saying here?
I think I understand it more than trying
Are
to
you sure?
locate the different pieces of paper that it came from, but yeah.
I mean, I'm fine, but we want to make sure we know what we're voting on.
I do believe I know what we're voting on.
Okay.
Anyone else have a question? Okay, ready to vote? All in favor of the motion? Okay, any opposed? Passes unanimously. I'm so glad we all love street trees so much. Okay, 4B, to consider recommendation on petition TA 2303, minor subdivision changes, a request by the Town of Huntersville Planning Department for a text amendment and Article 2 definitions subdivision minor to cap the amount of lots. Yes, sir.
All right, good evening. So I'm here to discuss two changes, one to Article 2 of the subdivision ordinance and one to Article 7.5 of the zoning ordinance. So we'll start with Article 2 of the subdivision ordinance in regards to the definition of minor subdivision. So staff is proposing that we add a 5-lot limit to minor subdivisions. And below that, we have also added the language notwithstanding the preceding definition of minor subdivisions, as farmhouse cluster subdivisions are considered minor subdivisions and allow up to 6 lots with a minimum of 10 acres. That was not previously within your packet, but it has been added since then. So the purpose of this text amendment is to better align this ordinance with the original intent of minor subdivisions. Minor subdivisions are intended to be small-scale, simplistic developments that don't meet the threshold and review intensity of a major subdivision. They are intended to provide small-time developers and families with an opportunity to subdivide parcels of land. Minor subdivisions do not require public notices, though minor subdivisions will still require quality open space to protect rural corridors through Article 7, Part B. In this text amendment, this portion of the text amendment would not change this. Tree save is also required for minor subdivisions if a land disturbing permit is required. So this is not an unusual, language. There are 3 other municipalities that we know of within Mecklenburg County that have similar language, and you can see the amount that they allow within minor subdivisions. So what we are trying to avoid are large-scale minor subdivisions that strip out the length of the roads, which includes the removal of trees and additional curb cuts for driveways. And currently, the ordinance allows an unlimited amount of lots as long as it complies with the zoning ordinance. So here you see a 35-acre lot. If someone wanted to come in, they could potentially, I'm sorry, this is not 35-acre lot. But they could potentially come in and do 35 lots on this property. I believe it's closer to 40 or 50 acres. Bigger than that. I unfortunately don't have the acreage on here for you, but closer to 50. But just to give you an idea that someone could come in and put 35 lots all along the border of the road there, and that's something that we're trying to avoid. As we feel that does not fit in with the scale and the surrounding properties and rural characteristics of the area. Here's another example of a minor subdivision that has 10 lots along Hambright Road. So now you have 10 curb cuts that have been cut through the road. And if we have any questions on this portion of the text amendment, and if not, I can go forward to the second portion.
Kathy?
Could you give an example? I know you just showed us that example, but could you give us a smaller example of something, of a minor subdivision that is current?
Yes,
that
this
is
one, right?
approved, that would not be approved under this?
So if this text amendment was approved, this minor subdivision would not have been approved because it has more than 5 lots.
And how big is that parcel that was split into?
I believe it was, I don't have the exact number, but I believe it was around 16 acres.
What if we're talking smaller, like 2 acres?
What do you mean?
If you have something not as large, if you had a minor subdivision that was, say, 2 acres, can you think of anyone off the top of your head that has been built with that scenario?
So you mean like if the total 2-acre lot was
Was
subdivided?
subdivided into, say,
Yeah, so there's still the requirements under the zoning ordinance pertaining to whatever zoning district that lot was in, that would limit them based off of lot size and open space.
Would this be in any zoning in town?
Correct, yes.
Any other questions? Okay. Go ahead.
That is true, just to rehash here. If they wanted to do this subdivision, it would have to go through the major subdivision process now.
Okay, go ahead.
So moving forward to part 2, which is Article 7.5, buffer yards. So we are proposing to add a 10-foot buffer to all minor subdivisions that are located within the rural and transitional residential zoning districts. These buffers would only require existing vegetation to remain, and we did that to ensure that there was no extra unneeded financial burden on those owners. So here's an example going back to this previously looked at subdivision. If this was approved, there would be a 10-foot buffer around the edges of this property. So really the purpose here is to provide a separation from 2 different properties and try to remain as rural as possible within the rural and transitional residential zoning districts.
So you're adding this last section. That's the only thing you're doing here.
Correct, yeah.
Sorry, I hit my mic.
The rural, we're talking 45% open space, 0.9 units to the acre.
Say that again.
So density-wise in rural zoning, we're 45% open space, 0.9 units to the acre,
It
and a
can go
max.
up to 40% open space,
45, isn't it?
5% open
Yeah.
space.
Okay, and TR is 40% open space, 1.5 units on the growth.
Correct.
Okay. And we need a buffer because of
Yeah, so we're just trying to
40,
ensure
40 and
that-
45% open space in those zones. I just don't,
So
I'm not
going
following
back
it.
to this, if you lived off of Monte Carlo Drive, we don't have a requirement per se based off, what is going on with the lot of where that open space would be. They decided to put all the open space south, which leaves all the trees up towards the north cut down. So part of this is to ensure that even with the open space requirement, that we're providing at least some sort of separation between those 2 properties.
I mean, that's effectively what a setback is.
So the setbacks here, so the setbacks don't determine where the trees are on the property.
I understand, it's just, land is a finite resource, and when you inefficiently develop it and create more untaxed property, that, just,
Okay.
it affects housing affordability. So I'm just not following why we need buffers in areas that have such huge open space requirements.
Sure.
And residential to residential, I mean, Charlotte they don't have a buffer from residential to residential, and it's perplexing, so.
Yeah, but just to be clear, that's up to 45%. There, oftentimes in these minor subdivisions, they don't get anywhere close to that requirement. And in this case, they chose to put their septic systems in these folks' backyard. So by having that 10-foot buffer around there, you would at least ensure if there was existing vegetation, we're not asking them to replant it or supplement. If there's existing trees, those trees would need to remain, which would protect the adjoining property owners.
Jake?
Why is it always the person developing the property's responsibility to create a buffer to protect the adjoining people's property when the adjoining people's bought a piece of property that's vacant behind them, why aren't they taking the necessary protections to make sure that if my property line is here, that, why don't they create their own buffer if they want it on their property? Why is every time someone develops a piece of property, do they have to create these 10 and 20-foot buffers?
Sure, and I can tell you a little bit of history on that. So the Monica, is it Norman Park subdivision? At that time, there were no buffers required when that was done back in the 50s and 60s. So you can't do anything about that. If you were to come back and redevelop it, then they would have to install those buffers. So it's really, we decided at a point in time, buffers are part of our culture for Huntersville. So you can only affect what's going forward. You can't go back and retroactively. If that was if Monte Carlo wasn't there, if it was vacant land, like you said, and they were to come develop a subdivision, then they would absolutely put that 20-foot buffer in.
Any other questions? I just wanted to clarify when Scott asked, this is the only thing you're asking, we were talking about buffers in part 2, but part 1 is asking to add the part about minor subdivisions are only 5 lots, right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't hit my, didn't hit.
Are you done? Okay. Do we have any motions? Okay.
In a farmhouse cluster, how many lots can you get?
You can get 6 with 10 acres, but you can also have 2 farmhouse clusters if you have 20 acres.
So if you have 20 acres, you can create 2 6-lot
You could have up to 12 lots if you had 20 acres.
on 20 acres.
Kathy?
I'd like to make a motion to approve petition TA 2303, minor subdivision changes, a request by the town planning department for a text amendment to Article 2, definitions, subdivision minor, to cap the amount of lots allowed within a minor subdivision, and to Article 7.5, buffer yards, to require buffers for minor subdivisions located within the R and TR zoning districts as written by staff.
Second.
Okay. Motion and a second. Motion to approve the petition TA 2303, minor subdivision changes, a request by Town of Huntersville Planning Department for a text amendment to Article 2 definitions subdivision minor, to cap the amount of lots allowed within minor subdivision, and to Article 7.5 buffer yards, to require buffers for minor subdivisions located within the R and TR zoning districts as written by staff. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. 7-1, that passes. We are moving along. Item 4C is to consider recommendation on TA 2304, a request by Huntersville Planning Department for a text amendment, Article 9.54, solar energy facilities, to clean up the language. And I'm sorry, I didn't say thank you earlier, Nathan. Go ahead.
Okay, so we are revisiting solar panels. In the first half of last year, the town board approved a text amendment that removed SUP requirements for minor solar energy facilities and brought the ordinance into compliance with 160D, as well as reorganizing the text. For this specific ordinance, we are looking at 9.542, which is major solar facilities. So when we're comparing minor to major, a minor solar facility produces electricity for the property where it's located, and a major solar facility generates electricity for properties elsewhere. A major solar facility is considered a principal use that is permitted within the R, TR, and SP zoning districts. Because it is considered a principal use, it could never be an accessory to a residential structure, meaning that there is not a need to separate the uses into non-residential versus residential categories as they currently are. So for the sake of clarity and simplicity, we are proposing to remove these distinctions. All the general requirements that existed previously remain, including exemptions from parking requirements and requirements to submit existing feature plans. A major solar facility still requires a special use permit to be approved. And this does not affect minor solar facilities in any way. And to answer some questions that were brought forward, 160D applies only to minor solar residential collectors. Our ordinance and rules are written to promote the use of minor solar collectors as much as possible to help offset costs, and that can be for a residential or a non-residential lot. And the minimum 10-acre requirements for major solar facilities does not apply for minor solar facilities. A minor solar facility can be an accessory use on a property of any size. If you guys have any questions.
Would you put your slide up that talked about major facilities again?
Sure.
I have no problem with the text amendment. Someone can make one to do it. I'm ready to vote for it, approve. But I need to ask a question about major solar facilities. This really is a what if, and this is going to happen someday in some way. What if a developer builds a green development, and within the property that he buys, he or she, they put in a solar farm to provide power for that development, and it's solely for residential use? How does all of this apply?
So it depends if they're doing it as a accessory use for each home or as a separate facility. And if it's a separate facility on a separate property, it would be considered a major solar facility.
Would it still get the protection? Well, I guess this is a question for Emily, although she has laryngitis. Is that, would it still get the protections of 160D 914 in reference to residential? That is purely for residential use.
You can regulate the non-residential collectors more heavily than you can the residential. It's just the residential that are subject to the limitations as far as the regulation goes.
Yes, ma'am. But if the facility is purely for the residential use of one subdivision, it's still residential use, not commercial use. It's not really non-residential use, even though this might be considered a major facility.
So I think too that it really depends on the size and scale of it as well, and whether or not it would be able to be there. I had suggested leaving in the distinctions between residential and non-residential because I thought that there could be a possibility of having what you were essentially saying, but it was planning's decision to move forward with this edit.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. I apologize for that. It has nothing to do with our text amendment, but it was just a question that popped up, sorry.
Any other questions?
How does it affect if people take parking lots and put covered areas with the solar panels on top?
So in cases like that, that would be considered an accessory use. This is primarily, a major solar facility would be on a vacant lot where the facility exists as the primary permitted use with nothing else.
Any other questions? Do we have any motions? Matt.
I'll make a motion to, what's the name of this text amendment? It's TA. Approve TA 23-04 with the following changes. In Part C1, delete the reference to the general statute in the section under non-residential property because that statute only applies to residential. And then in section C3, replace the word slope with surfaces. So that would read, minor rooftop solar facilities on non-residential property are allowed on all roof surfaces versus slopes. If you have a commercial building with a flat roof, there's no slope. And those are the only two changes I have.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So we have the motion to approve recommendation on petition TA 2304 with the removal, including a removal of the reference to the statute, the state statute in C, non-residential property 1, and also the change to number 3 to change the word slopes to surfaces.
Can I just ask, is that referring to 9.541 or 9.542?
Point 1.
So you're asking for changes to 9.4 or 9.54.1?
Yes. Sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. I think what I hear you say is that the reference for the state statute, that statute is discussing residential use, not non-residential use.
That statute only applies to residential, and it's referenced under
So
the
that
residential property.
it's not an
section.
appropriate reference
Correct.
for that point. Okay. All right.
Comment. Commissioner?
I'm just curious if staff is okay with everything, the motion as made, and if not, please comment now.
I think he's referring to this right here.
When we were trying to distinguish the two, but we wanted the prohibitions to be the same, so that's why it was referenced there, but if you take it out, you can. But the whole point of that was now you're not gonna have this, right?
No. This is still, we're only changing point 2. He's looking for changes within 9.54.1, which is minor
Oh, for
solar.
mine? Yeah, so. So it is appropriate to have it there, Matt, because of the fact that we want the same location limitations to apply. And so you can still, for non-residential, apply whatever type of location prohibition that you want, because you're not limited in how you can regulate the non-residential. You're only limited in how you can regulate the residential.
I understand, but that particular statute only applies to residential uses. And if you're not limited on non-residential, you don't need to reference the statute because the statute doesn't apply. You don't.
They were trying to mirror, in that section, they were trying to mirror it, so that's why the reference is there.
I understand it was a cut and paste. It just doesn't apply, so.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So to clarify, make sure I'm clear. In non-residential uses, the town can be more restrictive or less restrictive. There's no, because the state statute there's no state statute. So what we have written for the requirements is not a problem. What I hear Matt saying is that reference doesn't apply to that, although we can do it. But the general statute doesn't apply.
That's correct, but we
Right.
were saying that it's going to be a limitation like that. But if the word pursuant is bothering you, we can change it to make it mirror in a different way.
I'm just trying to get clarification. It's Matt's motion.
We can wordsmith this, Matt, so that it doesn't read as if it's being required by that section, instead that it's mirroring what is in that section. I understand what you're saying. It's probably the word pursuant to that's bothering you, so we can change that.
It's okay.
I just think it needs to be eliminated because that specific statute only applies to residential. And we shouldn't limit our regulation to that statute.
Well, it's not limiting it. It's trying to say that it's being, essentially, that we are mirroring what that says in that section for non-residential as well. We can come up with a draft that doesn't say pursuant to, instead match the wording. But essentially, we're trying to say that we want that same prohibition to apply to non-residential, which we can do because we're not limited by the statute.
And I'm fine with that prohibition, that's not the issue. I don't see that there's any reason to list a statute that gives us no authority to regulate non-residential.
What difference does it make leaving it in there? If the town attorney wants it in there, what's the harm of putting a statute in there that?
Do you have a substitute motion?
I'm saying that we can take out the word pursuant to and say something along the lines as in, or we can wordsmith it to make it not say pursuant to.
Okay.
So the question becomes, do we want to wait and see what they come up with, or we want to go ahead and vote to approve it tonight?
We were hoping for a recommendation tonight.
Yes. So that is the motion on the table? Without the
Well,
language?
that would require an amendment to Matt's motion. Matt has a motion on the floor that says delete it. So it would require an amendment or a substitute motion.
Right. Jake?
I'd like to make a substitute motion just to leave it in. Get it passed.
What about the word surfaces, and can you do the rest of the motion? Can you speak to the rest of it?
Basically, I'm in agreement with the rest of it, except leave that statute in there because I don't think
Okay.
it affects anything.
Okay, so your motion is to recommend TA 2304, the text amendment to Article 9.54.1. You want to, only to change roof slopes to roof surfaces in C3. C3.
So it's basically amendment to Matt's motion just to leave that paragraph, that
Is
word.
there a second to Jake's motion? No second, okay?
I have an amendment, if you'll consider it, Matt. If you will, and we can, or, because I haven't written it out. I understand this is, I'm kind of discussing this for a second. I understand you want to delete that. I hear what the staff says about taking pursuant out. I'm making an amendment that staff study this and resolve this issue regarding the use of the general statute in this. If you and your second will accept that,
Yep, I'll accept that.
okay? And that, I'm sure that will be, I will see this again on the planning board. So
Okay,
I'm sure they'll have it resolved.
yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
Michael has a second.
I accept it.
But I thought it was Michael. Okay. So let's vote on this motion.
Is it for discussion or?
It is actually for discussion. Yes, sir. Jake?
So we're here as an advisory board to the planning, and we have a town attorney giving us legal advice. Why are we as an advisory board overruling? Unless any of us here on the board are attorneys. She feels it's important to keep it in there, as an attorney, why are we arguing? I mean, what's the difference of keeping it there legal as telling you to keep it?
I'll make a clarification. I think that the prohibition needs to be in there, and that is something that we can do. But I agree that it could be worded a bit better. So I'm agreeing with you, Matt, that we can take out the word pursuant and change it to something along the lines of as in, or we will wordsmith and come up with a way. So we will take the word pursuant out. But I agree that it needs to be in there and that we should leave that prohibition in there.
And that is what Frank's motion, amended motion was, to change the wording. Okay. Are we ready to vote on Frank's amended motion? Okay. So, on petition, we recommend petition TA 2304, the text amendment to Article 9.54.1 with the wordsmithing and the change to roof surfaces. All in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
Thanks.
Anything else? We have a motion to adjourn. We have a second, and we need to vote. I didn't forget this time. All right, ready? All in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Unanimous.